Welcome to the second session of the Black Country Funding Network for Arts and Culture. This has been possible thanks to support from the Arts Fundraising and Philanthropy, which has enabled us to bring in a consultant and facilitator, Sarah G. Sarah's from Indigo Limited and Spitalfields Music, and she's going to be leading on the session today. So over to you, Sarah.
Great, thank you very much. Let me just share my screen before we go any further. There we are. So very nice to be back with you today. Lovely to see some new faces, lovely to see some faces from last time. Also lovely to see some, I was going to say very old faces, that's terrible. I don't mean that. I mean people I've known for quite a long time. There's a difference. We decided when we were working on the brief for this that we would do this in these sessions in two parts, but make sure that it was possible for each of them to stand alone. So the first session that we did a couple of weeks ago was very much looking in on ourselves and how we were surviving at the current time as fundraisers, and indeed how Creative Black Country could support us as a group. This week we're moving on slightly, still looking at ourselves and our role in fundraising at this particular time, but also beginning to look at what our organisations might want to do in the future. So we've given it a rather ambiguous title of Imagining the Unknown, which I know is a tall order, but you know, there we go. So introductions, Yvonne's already given quite a bit of an introduction. For those of you that I haven't met before, I've lived in the West Midlands since 1999. I moved here to work for the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, where I worked for 7 and a bit years. I then co-founded Indigo Limited, which is a consultancy that looks at marketing, fundraising and organisational development. And then about 18 months ago, I had the opportunity to become the part-time chief executive of Spitalfields Music, which meant that I could combine the opportunity to run something with consultancy, which I found really fascinating. And I think that combined with roles as being a trustee of a number of organisations, it gives me a kind of interesting insight into the sort of arts ecology at this particular moment in time. So the first thing that I wanted to touch on, and we will be breaking you out into groups for this next little bit briefly, but also a couple of times during today's session, just so you're aware. The first thing I wanted to do was really check in on you all. We did a little bit of this last time, so some of you may remember this, which is really a question, where are you today? And then I'm going to ask you to share a moment of joy. And when I say where are you today, I'm not talking about geographically, I'm talking about this, which some of you may have seen previously. This is the blob tree. This is something that's used a lot in schools to help young people to characterise where they are feeling on any given day. I think it's really charming because each of these little blobs are numbered, and I think it's a really good way of capturing how we are feeling at any given point. So I would have said 2 weeks ago, I was probably up about number 15, still hanging on to the tree for dear life, but you know, feeling happy enough to wave and smiling. I think today I feel like about a number 9. I'm not quite lying on the floor like number 5, and I'm having a bit of fun and swinging on this contraption that's been rigged up here. But I don't feel that much further up the tree. It might just because it's Monday, but that's where I am today. So when you break into your groups, I'm going to ask each of you to characterise where you are on the blob tree. It might be useful if you can, to take a picture of it on your phone so you can remember what it looks like. That might be the simplest way of doing it. And I get lots of pictures of you all looking like you're posing for selfies, which is marvellous. So when you're doing your introductions to the other people in your group, if you could characterise where you are in terms of that. But I'd also like you to share a moment of joy. this is something that we started doing in team meetings at Spitalfield Music, and has been really quite amusing. Last week I had one colleague who said that her moment of joy was never having to gloss anything in her house ever again, because she'd finally finished all the DIY. My moment of joy was this really kitsch pink Buddha, who up until about 2 weeks ago was very grey and chipped and extremely weather worn, and I decided that I would spray paint it, Freudian slip, spray paint it in what was supposed to be a rose gold colour. I think it just looks like shiny pink, but I must admit it just gives me enormous happiness when I sit in my garden to see this hugely kitsch Buddha. So my moment of joy at the moment is this Buddha who is sitting in my garden. So by the amazing powers that Ros has vested in her, I'm going to ask her to put you all into groups. You're going to have maximum 10 minutes to introduce yourself to everybody, to talk about where you are in terms of the blob tree, and to share a moment of joy that you've had in the last week or so. Oh, great, wonderful to have you all back. I just wondered if there was anything that anybody particularly wanted to share from that, any particular moment of joy, or which blob they are this week. It's a terrible way to refer to you, isn't it?
I just wanted to say we've had lots of moments of joy, which is really positive, really. We've had lots of successes as artists. So that's been really good. We've done some very fast grants, like in 6 hours, and got them. So we got a Thrive, which is like to look at Arts Connect grants. That was done in 5 hours. We did one in 3 hours for Lux in London, like a filmmaking commission for disabled artists, and got one for Rinku. So we have just been firing stuff out as well as doing stuff that's taken more time. So yeah. So lots of moments of joy, which is positive.
Brilliant, well done. That's
There's
great.
a long list as well. I won't go through them all, but yeah, there's about 15 projects have been successful over the past 3 months, so that's good.
Very good. Anybody else?
I think in our group we had varying people in various modes. Some just starting to reopen things and start things, and still other people who are having to postpone events and having to rethink. So yes, I think it is true that it depends what day you're looking at it as where you are.
Absolutely.
I think I pointed out in ours, just on the blob tree, that I was probably about 11 and 12, and just letting people know that because I job share with Vicky, we're in a very luxurious position in having each other to kind of prop us up as and when we're feeling a little bit down about things. But yeah, half kind of positives and not so positives, but you know, they're halfway up the tree, feeling still optimistic. But yeah, some things that, you know, can't help but drag you down a little bit now and again, but we've got each other to prop us up a bit.
So 11 and 12 are perfect for you and Vicky in that case.
Absolutely, yeah. We're not quite 16, 17. I was just looking at where there's like one on top of you. Maybe next week.
Wonderful, thank you everyone. So let me just move this forward. I wanted to say congratulations to all of you. And I think we all kind of deserve this. We've now all made it through 6 months of this weird parallel universe that we're living in. That's probably taken all of us somewhat by surprise in terms of the impact on work life, on home life, on whether we're able to see families, whether we're able to produce work, all sorts of things. And 6 months is quite a long time when you think about it. So I think just getting this far everybody deserves an enormous pat on the back for this. I was talking to a friend the other day, and she said this to me. And I'm afraid my first thought was, bloody hell, the pressure. And that was probably because I was not on a particularly good stage on the blob tree at that point. But also it gave me enormous hope, because it made me realise that somebody who is very interested in the arts but doesn't work in our sector is telling us that we can be useful, that we have a purpose, that there is a structure that we can be part of, that's important to people's lives. And I think there was also a realization for me that the arts, and of course the arts in this, you know, covers heritage and a number of other areas that we would class within the creative cultural industries. But I think there was also the realization for me that that I need the arts too. I find that going to galleries or museums, that sort of feeds my soul. Playing music, particularly with other people, is the only time that I switch off completely from everything else that's going on in my life, because I've got to count the bar's rest, and if I don't, I'll cock it up. So that has disappeared from my life since March, as it has with so many other people as well. And when my friend said this to me, I thought, this is really interesting, because we are in a situation where we're being looked to provide things, but we are also deficient in this area ourselves. And it made me realize that actually we're all grieving. We're grieving for something we can't do, or if we are able to do it, perhaps not in the way that we originally imagined. And that's quite a lot to deal with. And I started reading up on the different responses that people have to crises. And there were three things that really hit me, three articles or things that really chimed. One was that some of you will be aware of this, that there's an acronym, as there so often is, around a change and particularly around grieving. And it's dread, which is that we all go through different stages. There's when there's a big change, you go through a denial, you go through resistance. So denial is pretending obviously that something's not happened. Resistance, you know, moving forward with it, exploring the idea, not quite sure about it. Acceptance, you know, that kind of, well, we're in it now, we just have to get on with it. And then the rolling it out, the doing it bit. But there were two other things that I came across as well. And one was a really interesting article. We will send you the link with these slides later on, which talks about surge capacity. It was somebody from the tech industry that had written it. But they were saying that each of us has our own surge capacity, which is an ability for us to kind of cope with a particular surge in activity, or call on our particular resources, and that's usually built into our capacity. But what's really challenging is that we can't sustain it for a long period of time, and we are now, of course, 6 months in, and that made me that chimed with me. And just this morning I came across a tweet which was from a really interesting woman called Dr. Anisha Ahmed, or Professor Aisha Ahmed, who is an expert in international security. She's based in Toronto, and she was talking about the fact that there's an arc to any work that she does in terms of international crises. And I just wanted to read this to you because it struck me as being quite opposite with how we might be feeling at the moment. So what Professor Ahmed said was, the 6-month mark in any sustained crisis is always difficult. We have all adjusted to this new normal, but might now feel like we're running out of steam. Yet at best, we're only a third of the way through this marathon. How can we keep going? First, in my experience, this is a very normal time to slump. I always hit a wall 6 months into a tough assignment in a disaster zone. The desire to get away or to make it stop is intense. I've done this many times, and at 6 months, it's like clockwork. At this time, our crisis is global, and there is nowhere to run. And that's okay. I've had to power through that 6-month hump before, and there is life on the other side. Right now, it feels like we're looking ahead at a long, dark, wintry tunnel, but it's not going to be like that. Rather, this is our next major adaptation phase. We've already relearned how to do groceries, how to host meetings, just like this, and even teach classes. We've now found new ways to be happy and have fun. But as the days get shorter and colder, we need to be ready to innovate again. This is my first pandemic. I think it's all of our first pandemic, but it's not my first 6-month wall. So what can I share to help you? First, the wall is real and it's normal. And frankly, it's not productive to try and ram your head through it. It will break naturally in about 4 to 6 weeks if you ride it out. Of course, there are things that we have to do. Work, teach, cook, exercise. But just don't expect to be sparklingly happy or wildly creative in the middle of your wall. Right now, if you can meet your obligations and be kind to your loved ones, you get an A+. Also, don't be afraid that your happiness and creativity are gone for the rest of this marathon. It's not true. I assure you that it will soon break, and you will hit a new stride. But today, just roll with it. Clear away less challenging projects, read a novel, download that meditation app. Frankly, even though we cannot physically leave this disaster zone, try to give yourself a mental or figurative shore leave. Short mental escapes can offer respite and distance from the everyday struggle. Take more mental leave until you clear the wall. In my experience, this 6-month wall both arrives and dissipates like clockwork. So I don't fight it anymore. I don't beat myself up over it. I just know that it will happen and trust that the dip will pass. In the meantime, I try to support my mental and emotional health. Take heart. We've navigated a harrowing global disaster for 6 months with resourcefulness and courage. We have found new ways to live, love, and be happy under these rough conditions. A miracle and a marvel. This is hard proof that we have what it goes to keep going. So, dear friends, do not despair of the 6-month wall. It's not permanent, nor will it define you in this period of adversity. Trust that the magic that helped you through the first phase is still there. Take a breath and pause. You'll be on the other side in no time. And that struck me really forcibly when I read it this morning, as being something very similar to what a lot of my friends and I've been talking about at this moment, but also what the arts and creative sector are going through, because it is bloody difficult at the moment. I mean, there's no two ways of getting about that. So what can we do? Well, last time, those of you that were around will remember that we talked about this, how will we get through this? And we talked about the idea that everybody at the moment is in Team Human, and that some people need to be concentrating on Team Now, getting organisations back open and making sure that the lights are on and that we're looking after everybody. And then other people's are part of Team Next. And really what I wanted to look at today is how we as fundraisers have to be part of Team Next. We may also have responsibilities as part of Team Now, but we really have to be concentrating at this point on Team Next. I think we're now in a moment to act rather than to react. I think the moment for reaction is done. We now have to take positive strides and move forward. And the reason why I think that fundraisers in particular have to be part of Team Next is that we have to be pragmatic about things. We all know that money follows vision, but this is fundraising in really odd circumstances. We know that things have changed over the last 6 months, and we know that it will change again. So there's little point, in my opinion, on preparing projects that are unfundable at this particular moment in time. And I kind of hate saying that, because I sometimes feel, that fundraisers often feel like the Grinch. You know, we are kind of the people that say, oh, it's a brilliant idea, but I'm not sure where you can get the money from that. But what I really loved about this poster for the Grinch were these two words at the top: scheme big. And I think that is something that fundraisers actually can contribute to any planning that's going on at the moment. We can scheme big. So our first major breakout this afternoon is going to get you doing just that. Now, having said that we're in this period where our creativity may have disappeared and it's feeling a bit challenging, and it's just after lunch, this might be a tall order, but what I would like all of you to do in your groups, and you will go back into the same groups. We decided this time around that we would keep you in the same groups so that you could get a sense of progression through the sessions this afternoon. What we'd like you to do is imagine what your organisation could do in the future, and then, but do it in a very specific way. So I was struck recently by a conversation I was part of that the Mayor of London actually was hosting about what he was calling the 15-minute city. And although this was London specifically, I don't think it is just that city that this applies to. And the idea that a lot of people in government and local government are toying with at the moment, I gather, is the idea that everybody should be able to access everything that they need within 15 minutes of their home. And it struck me that that's a really interesting way of working, because of course in the past there would have been cinemas or bingo halls or doctor surgeries or schools or all these things in very close proximity to your home. But as we've changed, we've erected, out of town retail parks. We've combined lots of smaller schools into one massive sort of academy type setup. We've closed down many places of worship and put them into other ones. We've centralised most of the arts provision that we're talking about in many places too, that you have to go into a bigger town or city to access it. And I think that's posing an interesting challenge for us at the moment, when so many people are not wanting to leave their house. Certainly where I live, there's a huge emphasis on walking and using a bicycle, and to try and encourage people not to use their cars anymore and use public transport. But I'm not sure I want to use public transport at the moment. I feel quite safe in my little car, my little bubble, driving from A to B. And forgive me, I know it's destroying the planet and I know it's really bad, but I quite like to live long enough to see the planet to get to the next stage. So at the moment, I just want to drive in my car when I have to go anywhere. So the 15-minute city does matter to me. So what I would like you to do in the next session is to imagine the 15-minute city. Imagine what that could look like for you and for your organisations. And then think about what your organisation could do to be part of that. I know this is taking quite a leap of faith at this time in the afternoon, but I think if we can start to imagine that sort of possibility, it might then open up opportunities for funding. I would just say one point at this stage. This is only ideas, so nothing is a stupid idea. There's no but, it's always yes and don't knock anything out yourself. Yeah, I think it's actually quite important for all the ideas to come out, because it might be an idea that in retrospect you think is silly for you, but it might be picked up by somebody else in the group and they think, you know what, that's perfect, I can recycle that. So we will very shortly put you back into your breakout groups. If one person could scribe for each of the groups, that would be enormously helpful, because I will be asking each of them to feed back at the end of this, partly because I'm really interested to hear all the ideas, but also I'm sure that there are ideas that pop up in one group that might be applicable to others and we might want to take forward in the next stage of this. So we're going to give you a reasonable chunk of time to do this. And Rosalind's just about to put you into your groups. We will give you, I'm just looking at my time scale now, we will give you until just after 3 o'clock to reimagine your worlds. So Rosalind, could you take over now? Okay. Are we talking anarchy or world takeover bids, or what are we talking about? Who'd like to feedback?
Well, my first point was that I was quite surprised to be told I was grieving.
Okay.
Because I'm not. And as it transpired in the conversation, this is probably because I'm not part of an organisation. I work for myself as a writer and a performer, and it's been brilliant. I've written loads. I've performed loads online. I've done lots of voiceover work. I've written books and plays and stuff, and I've been having a hoot. It's been great. And the more I told people about this, the more I realised I was perhaps on my own in this respect. And organisations, as Sam was saying, sitting in an empty theatre is a rather depressing prospect. And perhaps those people are grieving. But I'm not at the moment. So I'm all's well in my little world.
That's so good to hear, Ian. That's wonderful.
Shall I feedback from... Oh.
Go ahead, Karen.
Sorry. I think we're in room 2, I'm not sure. But so we started off the conversation thinking about arts provision to start with. We've then got on to kind of wider things that you need to survive and things that enhance your life and where the art sits and that kind of argument. So Catherine from Wolverhampton said she'd spotted some graffiti in Wolverhampton, which is more art now. So about having art visible in the community and really easily accessible. And at which point Janine and from the International Press Festival was talking about kind of that participatory element, or using community spaces or shops that are now lying empty and so on, and as pop-up studios for participation, as galleries and so on. And then just it's very serendipitous. Sam also chipped in that as part of the British Arts Festival Fringe next year they're doing exactly that in Wolverhampton, so using those shops and implementing pop-ups. Glass shop fronts obviously ideal for social distancing but give you a natural kind of viewpoint or a stage, and then hopefully having a legacy programme thereafter, so not just kind of being implemented for the duration of the festival. Then we then moved on to talking about the kind of more nuts and bolts, or the Grimner, I think it was, the biology, all those things you need, but food. So I talked about here at BCLM, obviously we've got a lot of space, we've already got gardens, but whether there's kind of an opportunity for communities to come and use that, or people to use as allotments, to grow local produce, as to then sell that in the way of kind of a community hub type model. And then we moved on to retail more widely with Trevelyan at New Hampton, talking about kind of refill shops, also food selling, but also making the point that I think quite a lot of us maybe don't reside in the areas that we work. So obviously a lot of feasibility would need to be done, but where to probably quite a few of us, a refill shop might be amazing. To a local, someone in your locale, that might not be at the top of their list. Childcare was a big one for New Hampton Arts Centre. That was a great idea, we thought, about that provision, registered provision. But then taking it a step further, and a la kind of forest schools, do you have childcare settings within arts organisations that then have that arts provision as a basis, which we know kind of erodes as they go through kind of mainstream education. And also that New Hampton had done a film night, I think last week, successfully. We talked about, there's a lot of those the large scale drive-in commercials, but that there's space in the market for something smaller, for people that don't have cars. Accessibility was mentioned again by Catherine, making sure that that's factored in. I think that was probably around it. Does anyone else want to chip in on some of the other ideas? I think that was it.
Very comprehensive. That's amazing. Funny enough, on the idea of childcare, I was talking to somebody this morning who founded the UK's first integrated work hub and childcare setting, which is somewhere in southwest London. And it just struck me as such a a damn obvious idea.
Obvious.
Really good idea. And then I started thinking, my goodness, how could you build the arts into that as well? So it almost becomes a bit more, you know, like a Montessori school type setup, but for preschool. That would be a pretty amazing start in life for people. Yeah.
We did just also talk about where I suppose where it sits with several of us, I'm sure, are Arts Council, you know, recipients of funding, and, you know, sustainability versus kind of profit versus, you know, are you going to, and having enterprise arms and you know, separate companies to run some of these kind of more, say, commercial activities through. But obviously that's all the boring governance stuff, not the idea stuff.
Yeah, but interesting. And Sajida's just posted in the chat a link to an article on sharing green space, or yeah, an article on that. And I'd also put in the links to surge capacity, and then the Twitter thread. Sam had asked for that in particular, but I just thought it was easier to share it there. Brilliant, that's great. Thanks so much, Carolyn. What about the other groups? There were 3, I think. Yes.
I said I would feed back from group, I think we're group 1, I think.
Whichever. Thanks, Margaret.
Yeah, so we started off talking about, so Sajida was talking about mobile spaces, creating more mobile spaces for pop-up activity. You know, so thinking about what's important to the community at this moment. The idea of those being like something that could tour around as well, and also thinking about repair cafes, so people don't throw so much stuff away and they can bring something along to be shown how to fix it. And I think sort of the basis for that was thinking about places where people can meet safely but also social distance. And working with the voluntary sector as well, so you don't need to reinvent something new, but work with what's already there. And then I was thinking about in terms of the Arts and Museum Service in Wolverhampton, where I work, and the fact that we now have quite a lot of vacant space in our buildings because we have fewer people working on site, and I think that would be a longer term thing as well, of people working partly from home. And I was thinking about how we could use those spaces better so that they become more used by the community, and that was in a number of ways. So partly around creating social space, but things like somewhere to eat and meet. So we've got a new cafe which we're going to have on our ground floor, so it'll be more visible and more accessible and hopefully attract more customers. So that's one opportunity. But also trying to work more with local creatives around allowing them a space to rehearse and practice or pilot ideas, and you know, making that more accessible, I suppose, to those groups, and make it easier for them, because I think we're probably seen as a building that's quite hard to penetrate, partly because physically, you know, it's a big sort of neoclassical building, and so we need to be able to try and reach out to those communities, and also ways that we can work with our collections as well to you know, to explore the collections. And then Johnny was talking about art in hospitals, and he was talking about the new hospital that they're building in an area of high level of deprivation in Smethwick, and is that right? Smethwick, I can't remember exactly where it is. But they want that to be a flagship for you know, hospitals in the region, and ways that they could work with young people through STEAM subjects by things like creating prototypes for healthcare and then being able to exhibit that work, because there'll be an extra gallery space within the hospital. And then Anand was talking about something around working with communities, and that you need to go where people are, and you need to build better relationships between civic institutions and the community, and finding a stronghold in densely populated areas, So you need to really understand your community, also to understand the sensitivities within that community. So what might be the barriers preventing them, coming into your spaces? And then that led us on to a really interesting discussion around what those barriers were, and around leadership in our cultural organisations. Sajida also raised the question around what we're doing for non-English speaking elderly people. So there's something there as well about how we could work more with those communities. I think that's it. But if anyone else in my group wants to add anything, then go ahead.
I'm just going to add that that was a really good summary, by the way, Marguerite, with the conversations that we had. The things that I mentioned are inspired by the social labs that, so none of it is new. So Dudley CoLab, Wolverhampton for Everyone, there are already some great work. So it's just kind of piggybacking onto those guys really and seeing what works as well, because they're doing some really good engagement work. So yeah. I
really like the idea about the repair workshops. Like if you've got broken toys and things, it's so in vogue, isn't it? Like on TV. But are there some of those running already? Because the whole thing, I'm just thinking about make, do, amend and all of that around, some of the stories that we tell. It's got a natural resonance with where we are. So maybe that's something we should pick up on.
There is a project in Wolverhampton called Wolverhampton for Everyone, and they've been doing TED Talks and repair cafes. So they do quite a lot of really grassroots projects with people.
In fact, Carolyn, when I came to BCLM, and I still haven't sent my my slip back, my feedback form, but that was one of the things that struck me about the repair shop and how brilliant it would be to have that kind of place. That it would fit really well. So.
Brilliant. I love it when ideas kind of ping around groups and people pick up the different bits that mean something to them. I'm really interested also in the idea of pop-up mobile spaces. It feels like there's something that could be very interesting for all sorts of organisations in doing that. Okay, third group.
So I think I'm speaking back. So we also kind of went back slightly before we went forward, if you like, because I think the group hadn't finished talking and doing all their introductions. So we did a bit of that, and that's how when we found out that Ian was because he hadn't done his introduction, was absolutely loving lockdown. In opposition to the rest of us.
Yes, everybody, I think.
Which is great, but we did speak about how actually it has brought about new opportunities, and we were talking about how we actually just need to start thinking differently, because it won't be the same as we've done before. It's almost not. There's no point trying to keep doing that, because we're not going to be able to do that. So we do need to start thinking differently. And thinking about the new opportunities that sometimes the digital options provide. Sam was talking about their streaming project, so almost like that people can't come to the theatre, so they're going to stream what happens and stream it into schools and care homes and places like that. So sometimes that's you have to go. If people can't come to you, you have to go to them, and that's one way of doing it. We also had a big discussion about that digital divide, though, that it's not, it kind of blocks out also quite a lot of the communities that we work with. So it's part of the mix, but it's not the only answer, was what we were talking about. We had the theme was about making things accessible, really, making things as accessible as possible within walking distance, and and Alan had also having a mechanism that you can make these small transactions locally as well. That he'd noticed sometimes a bit of a lack of imagination in schools, and how do we kind of overcome that, and using the spaces that we have, whether they're community centres, whether they're schools, whether they're places of worship, how do we use them differently, and having a different, but we need to really it starts from the thinking. We have to start thinking differently as well, because it won't be the same as before. I think that, so there was lots of kind of similar comments about pop-up spaces, and Ian, we talked about going back to the streaming, and also the online performances also has enabled people to have a more interaction with performers. When you have a streaming event and then there's like a Q&A session afterwards, we were talking about that. There was worry about not having pantomimes this year, and that for venues that's going to mean a lot of, almost like over 50% of income. How we're going to overcome that. Losing skills. So not just performing skills, but technician skills, backstage skills, producer skills, for if these events aren't happening, and losing people from the sector. But then we also went round to talk about, well, no, this is back to the thinking. We need to think differently, because then actually, in order to get Sam's Arena Theatre back and up and running, performers and producers need to put in different applications to work in a different way, and then that will bring, so people will be re-employed, but probably just in a different way. I think we just felt that we really resonated with your period of this new transition period, that that there is a bit of a wall, but it's because we can't keep thinking as we have done in the past. We need to think differently. I hope that summed up what we've talked about.
Yeah, it's good. Thank you.
Ian, I think you're surviving because of your cat.
Yes, no, she's very handy. There you go. This is Harriet, who sent me a birthday card, surprisingly. Yes, that keeps me sane.
Yeah, I think there's something really important in what you were feeding back on, Yvonne, around trying to find the way of putting it. Listen, I'll just say it. I think the funding system, particularly the Arts Council, for those that are getting funding from the Arts Council, is kind of holding us in this holding pattern, really. Sort of waiting for, well, the end of March, I think is the next line, whereas the rest of us are just having to get on with life. I mean, it's desperately sad, but I'm sure we all know colleagues in the sector whose roles have been made redundant. We can't wait until the end of March or April to get back up and going again. We have to get things going again in some way, in some different way now. So all the things that you've all been talking about is very much part of that. And for me, there's a massive difference between a fundraiser that is chasing money and creating a project just to get some money through the tills, as it were, through the income stream, and fundraisers being around the table when organisations are thinking seriously about the future. And for me, I think that the latter is really important. I know a number of you do a number of different roles, but there's a point where you have to put your fundraiser hat on in doing that. And I think that's really important, because we are by nature always horizon scanning. We are always thinking about how we try and make things happen. So I think it's really important that we are part of a planning team. So if I can just go back into my share screen. Oops. Fabulous. So I really want to move us on now and think about, so we've got the idea, we've got some of the vision. How do we actually make that happen? We're now very much moving into an era where the furlough scheme for those organisations that were able to use it is coming to an end. Support for anybody that is self-employed, if indeed they were able to access it, is shortly coming to an end. The emergency funding is very much drying up now. Donors may be concerned about their own money. Trusts and foundations are certainly looking at new funding options. Hopefully there will be as much, but you know, I would be surprised if they didn't take some hit as part of this at some point too. So I think the time has come to think not only of the vision, but what we will need to realise it. Do we have the capacity to realise the things that we've been talking about? Do we have the resources, or frankly, do we all just need to have a holiday first? And I think there might be an element of that required at this point. Some of you that were around last time may well remember this, which is a graph that I share, a matrix rather, that I scared? Maybe I did. Shared is what I meant to say. Which is looking at project prioritization. And it's a very simple way, I think, of looking at which projects are the ones that perhaps one should be moving ahead with. So the two axes I've got here is impact on society and then importance to the charity. I know you're not always working for a charity, some of you are working for non-charitable organisations, some of you are working for yourself. But I think the same thing still stands up. And if one can plot projects that you have coming up into this matrix, I think it really clarifies thinking on which are the ones that should be moved forward. I also think it's fascinating to get fundraising teams doing this, but getting other parts of the organisation doing it as well, because you may well find dramatically different interpretations of it, which are in themselves worth noting and thinking through. So if you've got a project that won't have a massive impact on society and isn't that important to the charity, it's unwanted, just walk away now. There's no point. Pretend it's not happening. If there's something that may well be really of interest to your wider community, but it isn't of importance to the charity, it will be unloved. It's going to be very, very hard to push that one through, and it probably needs a sort of a sugar daddy or a very generous funding stream to convince the charity that it's worthwhile doing. You could of course have a project that is just not in line with your own charitable objects, and in that situation I would suggest that you probably have to walk away as well. I'm always surprised how often that happens, because it shouldn't be the case. But some of the things that you were talking about with repair shops or community cafes, I see absolutely no reason why that couldn't be within your charitable objects, but it would just have to be framed in the context of excuse me, education of the community or advancement of the arts, or whatever your particular objects say. You then have projects that might be a massive personal pet project for somebody in the charity, very often the chief executive, it has to be said, or the artistic director. But it's not something that would have a massive impact on society as a whole. That for me is wishful thinking. It might be something that the organisation wants to drive through, but if the impact on society is low, the chances are it's going to be really hard to fundraise for as well. So that too would have a warning bell sounding for me. And then the final one, really important to your organisation, really important to society. And of course, those are where you want all of your projects sitting. But in reality, that's not always the case. And I think this project prioritisation is a very quick and easy way of doing that, doing this whole hierarchy, I suppose it is, you know, figuring out which are the projects that you want to move forward with, because it seems to me at the moment there isn't enough capacity. There may well still be people on furlough in your organisation, there may be people that are in jobs that have been lost. So we're all going to have to be a much smarter workforce in the future to make sure that we're not wasting our time on things that just won't happen. So to that end, I would like you to start thinking about some of the projects that you were toying with in your previous groups. Start thinking them up as projects in themselves. So the questions I very often ask are very basic ones, but it doesn't do any harm to be reminded of them. What is this project that you're talking about? If you can't do this sort of the elevator pitch, if you can't sum it up in 3 sentences, it's probably a bit over-engineered. So let's take it back. What is it? Why are you doing it? How are you going to do it? Who's it for? Where is it going to take place? And when will it happen? And it might be that within your group that you want to pick one project and work it up in a little bit more detail and do it as a bit of a case study. Or if you've got ideas that were very similar across all of the organisations, you could start doing that for multiple projects simultaneously. I'm going to leave that one up to you because I think it's probably what is the most use for the group. So in the next section, we're talking about how do you actually realise the future? We've got the ideas, how do you move it forward? I think so often our default is we just need money. And you probably do need some money, of course, to make it happen, but it's not the only thing. And if money is in short supply, are there ways that we can work with other partners to help bring this sort of stuff about? So Rosalind is now going to put you back into your groups, and we will come together again in just over 15 minutes time. Well, in that case, does your group want to go first?
Whose was that one? Was that ours?
Whoever said that they were working right up to the last moment.
Oh yeah, that'll be us then again. Yeah, I'm not sure we had quite as coherent as discussions the first time around, but we had lots of valid stuff. So we took the principle of Trevelyan had to leave actually. The idea around the pop-up shops and participation and presenting art in that way. So the what, I'm not sure we quite clarified it, but various discussions around you know, artists being in these kind of spaces that are available within the kind of town centres and empty units and so on, and then the participatory angle, kind of given the why, because we were saying how a lot of people, and not necessarily old or isolated, but there's been a kind of loss of confidence. I think we've all kind of, you know, we've all hunkered down and been in our own kind of micro environments, and just, you know, even for me, for example, driving into Birmingham city centre seems a little bit scary now. It never used to be before. And so kind of to entice people back in and make them feel more confident about being out and being sociable, and getting across some of those kind of isolation barriers. How we talked about working with the bids across the Black Country, so the business improvement districts, and using kind of ambassadors that are already there, so those kind of networks, and working with them to kind of identify spaces, and then, you know, so negotiating. I'm sure there wouldn't be rates or anything on these spaces or anything like that, but working in partnership with them. We talked also a little bit around, I think we're going into next year, so around themed ideas as well. So and one idea that came up was around the window wonderland, which I hadn't heard it phrased like this before, but how people are going around and doing the trails from the rainbows or whatever in their windows. If you've got art activity happening in an empty unit, say, whatever theme that might be on, then the neighbouring shops that are still open and still trading, getting them to join in and creating that kind of that buzz around it. We also talked about outdoor spaces as well, and whether, you know, you'd have kind of closing streets down, closing walkways down, and actually making it more of a festival-y type feel, I suppose. So yeah, we're still discussing around that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I read an article somewhere over the weekend, can't remember which newspaper it was in, where they were talking about the UK happy to be an outdoor society, but only between sort of May and September, and how we would have to reshape our thinking in the way that, you know, they do in Scandinavian countries, for instance. And being outside is a year-round activity. You just need to wear more layers at other times in the year. And it made me think that there was probably something in that. You know, obviously rain gets in the way, but only if we think of it, only if we don't plan it in as part of the original idea of it. Really interesting. Okay, and then the other group.
Marguerite, do you want to talk? We talked about a little seed of an idea that Marguerite had. So do you want to get back on this one?
Yeah, I'll try and remember, because I wasn't writing, well, I wrote a few things down, but I was just more in listening mode really. But we were talking about an idea that I'd had, which was around how to use the many empty spaces that we have now in our building, because we've got the main, I was thinking about the art gallery, although actually we have vacant space in the 2 other museums that I run as well, and the archives, but we were focusing on the art gallery. And just thinking about the sorts of things that we could do, and, you know, reaching out to the local community, and not just about, I suppose, doing it in that sort of, you know, great benevolent gesture, but also because of the added value it can bring to our building, making it a more vibrant place, and which would then enhance the customer experience. And also make it have a real relevance to the community, so to become a more welcoming space, I suppose. So we were talking about a number of things. I mean, one thing we talked about was our cafe, which we've already got some capital money to develop, because everybody felt that food was very important in terms of bringing people into buildings. So we talked about that. And then Ian was suggesting things like getting artists to work in the space, which we've done before with visual artists, but I was quite surprised to hear that apparently writers don't mind people watching them write, and would actually really welcome that opportunity. So we were thinking about that, and obviously that would link in with our literature festival that we do every year as well, and provide something quite different. We were talking about our collections, so our not wanting to go off on too much of a tangent, thinking about you know, doing events and activities, but also the fact that we are a museum, so we have a permanent collection. So how could we use that more? How could you use that more almost as a conversation, a starting point for people to have discussions? And how could we start to develop that differently so that it was more reflective of our local population? So yeah, so I think those are the main points. We talked about lots of things. It was really super helpful for me because of the fact that I'm only just really starting to think about it. But I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything that I've forgotten to mention in there.
No, I think that's a fair appraisal. I think the idea of the artists was artists as exhibits, wasn't it, more than just working in the space.
Yeah.
So they had to be shown what they're doing rather than just being like a workshop, which I think you were trying to avoid a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, that was great.
Oh, brilliant ideas. I love that. Do you come with your cat as well?
Oh, she sometimes goes in my stead, actually. She's very good.
You get a museum cat and a writer.
Absolutely.
You know, 2 for the price of 1.
What did you ask for?
I think one of the things that struck me in that feedback, and my goodness, it's really exciting, some of the ideas. Well, 2 things actually. One is that perhaps one of the things that comes out from this sort of session is that that we need more of this sort of stuff. You know, where there isn't really an agenda other than talking, and very often I think this is probably the equivalent of late night in a bar at a conference, which we can't do anymore. But having a sort of an unagenda type session where ideas start coming out, I think is absolutely fascinating. No. And there's a tool that I sometimes use to help with this. I will dig out a couple of slides on this and send them on to Yvonne. But it's a thing that it's called SWOT into TOWS, or TOWS, whichever way you pronounce it. So the idea is that you have strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. I'm sure most of you will have come across doing a SWOT analysis in the past, with strengths and weaknesses being internal and opportunities and threats being external factors. And then you reorder them. So you have strengths and weaknesses on one axis and opportunities and threats on another. And then you start matching up the things. So you might find something where you've got a real strength internally, but externally there's a threat on something, and it's a way of matching up skills. And there's something very freeing about doing that exercise. It's quite useful to do if you can get back with people doing it on post-it notes, because then you can start repositioning them around. But I'll send some slides through just in case it's helpful, because very often I found that, you know, the thing that you think is a weakness might be something that externally you can work with somebody else. And I suppose, just in drawing this to a close, that's one of the things that's really come through for me in this whole session, is that by collaborating, we can actually make the arts ecology much stronger. And it's not just arts organisations that perhaps we have to link with. One of the Twitter accounts that I found extraordinary during the whole lockdown period was Alan Lane, who runs Slung Low theatre company and venue in Yorkshire. And they, I think the term is pivoted very, very quickly, because they were asked by their local authority to become a community hub and a food bank. And the reason for that is that although they are an arts venue, it's a former working men's club that they operate from. And therefore it's an unthreatening space. It's used by people a lot in other times. And, you know, some days Alan was talking about the art that he was making. Some days he was talking about the fact that he found somebody selling one of the food parcels that he'd been giving out down the local pub and trying to make profit out of it. I mean, it's just the most extraordinary thing. So if you haven't come across him, Slung Low Alan on Twitter is a fascinating read. I think the other things that have come through is that we're absolutely on the cusp of new opportunities coming through, both in terms of what we can do as a sector joined up and individually, but also funders as well. I just picked up a tweet while you were doing that session from Garfield Weston Foundation that has said that from the 5th of October they will open up a new fund for arts sector organisations. Admittedly, for that one, you have to have had a turnover of more than $500,000 before COVID hit. So it won't apply to everybody. But they've set aside £25 million to help organisations get back on their feet, look at different, attracting new audiences, new business models, all that sort of thing. And for organisations, excuse me, that were under that, they are encouraging incredibly strongly people to apply with ideas and new things. I know the Paul Hamlin Foundation will very shortly announce what they're planning to do, and there are other trusts that are on the cusp of announcing their future plans as well. So I would suggest that those of you that are in a position to apply to such organisations just keep an eye on that sort of thing. But I suppose the overall thing that I'll take away from the session today is just feeling really positive about all the ideas that were coming out and all the energy. I think if you get a bunch of fundraisers together, we really, really can change the world. We're not the Grinch after all. We are scheming big, and I think that's absolutely fascinating. So I wish you enormous good luck and good health for the coming months. Yvonne, I know that you wanted just to wrap up with a couple of things as well.
Yes, thank you so much, Sarah. It's been really lovely to be able to have you to facilitate and put us into rooms and give us things to think about, and to remove ourselves from our daily chores and big list of things to do. And enable you to kind of think and chat to other people about ideas. That's been really great. So thank you so much for these last two sessions. If you missed the last session, it is recorded and it's on a YouTube link. And if you need that, I'll I'll send the link through to you again, to everybody again. I think Rosalind is going to put a link in the chat, and if you can, just copy this link for us, because I know you guys know, because you are fundraisers and you know how important it is that we have to feed back to our funders. Please, if you could fill in the survey for us, that would be really, really helpful. And also to help us with the network about what we want to do next, where we want to go to, because there are funded sessions are finished, but now we can kind of carry on and do kind of what we want and take it where we want to. And on that point, I just wanted to point out that we have another session on Thursday the 8th of October at 10:30, and it's part of the Black Country Business Festival, and we're actually going to be having a session about partnership funding, which I think is going to be one of the ways forward for us all. So if you can pop that in your diary, I will also send you the link, because you just need to book onto that through, I think it's Eventbrite. And I'm going to be co-hosting that with Heather Clark and Sam Hope from Wolverhampton, because we're currently doing that. We're currently doing a partnership application. So we're going to be talking through the challenges and the opportunities that can come from partnership funding. Also, as part of that kind of festival, Jill Brown from Arts Council is going to be doing a session on project grants, and that's on Wednesday the 7th of October at 10:15. And there's on something it's slightly different. Zoe Partington is doing a session on accessibility and digital marketing. So I'll send you all the links to that. I just also wanted to mention about our creative advisors that are out in the 4 regions. So in Sandwell, Walsall, Dudley and Wolverhampton, there is a creative advisor for each of those areas, and they have some tiny seed money to give to groups or individuals who have an idea, a creative idea in the community, and they want to kind of try it out or take it further. So I just wanted to highlight that Creative Black Country have that resources as well, if that's helpful. Thank you to Sarah. It's been great 2 sessions. Thank you to yes, round of applause. Or we can do a little clap as well, can't we? Little clap on Zoom now. Thank you everybody for being generous, for giving up your time, also your ideas, because that's what gets things going. And it's been just really lovely to see everybody, not quite face to face, but almost face to face from moving on from email. So that's brilliant. Thank you very, very much, and hopefully see you next time.